So I'm going to turn the attention away from Muslims. My research has been, although I will return to Islamophobia at the end, my research has been on the Anglo-Jewish community, both mainly historically and to a lesser extent today, and I'm going to bring that perspective to some questions around racism and faith communities. I guess first I want to say something about faith communities. And I similarly share some discomfort, I guess, with that term. And it's the way in which the leadership of the Anglo-Jewish community historically has, or did define itself. So in the period, the kind of early modern period up until the 20th century, the kind of leaders of the Anglo-Jewish community defined themselves very much as a community of faith. And I believe that that term represented both an assimilationist logic and a communalist logic. The communal leadership were themselves very acculturated or assimilated culturally, and they did everything they could to anglicize themselves, as they called it, and to anglicize from the late 19th century the poorer Jewish immigrants who were arriving here. The Anglo-Jewish communal leaders understood themselves as Englishmen of the Jewish faith, different from other Britons only really by virtue of religion. And I think that that idea of faith in that, so they saw themselves as, like, say, Quakers or other Protestants, they were just like other English people, differing only by faith. And I think that concept of faith has a history which is very much tied up in a kind of Christian and specifically Protestant understanding of religion as something intellectual, I suppose, about belief, about the structure of belief, rather than about practice and everyday life, which is very much how religion features in non-Protestant Christian, particularly non-Protestant religions. So this period, this crucial area of difference understood as faith was the grounds on which that communal leadership based their right to lead and to represent and to speak for the people they thought of as their co-religionists. So faith legitimated their authority. However, I think there's considerable evidence that ordinary Jewish people in the kind of first couple of generations of mass immigration in the late 19th and 20th century, places like the London's East End or Chapeltown in Leeds, understood their Jewishness very differently from this. And whether religious or not, whether from what we now call the ultra-Orthodox through to the anarchists and so on, they related to Jews not as co-religionists, but as their kin, I suppose. They used words like brothers and sisters when they were talking, for example, about Jews in Russia or Romania experiencing anti-Semitism. They didn't understand them as co-religionists, they understood them as kin. And I think in today's language, they didn't have access to this language, but we would say they conceived of themselves as an ethnic community rather than as a faith community. Later in the 20th century, when the language of ethnicity was being widely disseminated in society at large, communal leaders were very reluctant to use that concept and to use the idea of ethnic community, because I think it undermined the assimilationist logic and the assimilationist logic repudiation of Jewish difference on which their politics and their communal authority have been based. So you can see some voices on the edge of the communal mainstream using the kind of idea of ethnicity from the late 1960s, but it was only in the 1990s that kind of communal leaders really started to understand Jews as an ethnic community, and even now it remains contested. And I think what changed by the 1990s was a shift in the strategy whereby the communal leadership legitimated its authority. In work I'm developing with my colleague Keith Carn-Harris, we argue that the officially, although not of course actually, monocultural version of Britain at the time when the community was formed engendered what we're calling a strategy of security among Anglo-Jewry. They emphasised secure British belonging and citizenship. And the communal leaders, as the already assimilated, the already anglicised and successful, they were able to act as gatekeepers to a form of secure British belonging and citizenship for the immigrants and their children. So, for example, the way that communal leaders responded to fascism and anti-Semitism, mostly black shirts in Britain and the Nazis abroad, I think exemplify this strategy. The communal leaders responded as quietly as possible. They cautioned against communal kind of activism, and they even blamed the ostentatious behaviour of lower-class Jews for the problem. Many of you know that David Rosenberg's written about this very In the context of a shift away from a kind of official monoculturalism to an official ethos of integration from the 1960s, which of course Roy Jenkins defines famously as not a flattening process of assimilation but as equal opportunity accompanied by cultural diversity, Anglo-Jewish leaders began to belatedly shift away from the strategy of security to what we're thinking of as a strategy of insecurity.